In this lesson, we're going to quickly go over automatic stabilizers, what they are. We're going to talk about what the multiplier effect is, the difference between deficit and debt, and that should do it for this lesson. We won't play the quiz game because we did that in class. So automatic stabilizers, again, are any programs which come from laws that increase spending when times are tough and decrease spending when times are good. One example would be the progressive marginal tax, which we have in this country, and the way it works again is on the first amount of money that you make, the first, say, $15,000, you would just pay 15% of that in tax, but then on the next amount of money, say the next $10,000, you'd pay 20% of that $10,000 in tax, and then the next 25% you would pay, the next amount of money you would pay that 25% tax on that amount, and then anything above a certain amount of money you would pay 35% tax on it. And that means that if you get a pay cut, you actually pay a lower percent in tax, and if you get a pay raise, you pay a higher percent in tax. And this helps slow down the losses in aggregate demand, because if someone gets paid less money, they also have to pay less taxes, so they can still spend a little bit more than otherwise. And if someone gets a big raise, instead of increasing aggregate demand by a lot, it will just increase it by less because they're paying more in taxes. So it's a way to automatically stabilize aggregate demand. Other examples of automatic stabilizers include unemployment insurance. So if someone loses their job, they are automatically eligible to get money from the government to help them during that time, and they automatically qualify for that program, and it helps them continue spending money, which helps keep aggregate demand up. And Social Security is for people who are retired. Normally they would demand less because they wouldn't have a job, they wouldn't have income, so they would be living off their savings. But Social Security helps them continue to have money and able to spend money so that aggregate demand stays up, and that happens automatically after a certain age. Social Security also does disability insurance, so if someone is injured on the job or is disabled, they would have income that they could spend so that aggregate demand could automatically stay high. Medicare and Medicaid, same deal. You qualify for it, and it's a way that the government helps you pay for medical care that you might not otherwise be able to pay for, and helps keep aggregate demand up automatically. And food stamps, or SNAP, is a program that you automatically qualify for, and it helps you continue spending money to keep aggregate demand up when times are tough. The multiplier effect is the idea that for every dollar spent, some of it gets saved and some of it gets re-spent. So if you imagine someone going to a store and spending money at that store, the owner of that store will take that money, save a little bit of it, and then probably pay his workers in their wages, or buy some new merchandise from a company, buy some more candy bars from a company. And so that money that you spent in the store gets re-spent again. And actually, if the store owner pays their worker their paycheck, then those workers are going to spend that money in another store, and then that store will pay its workers. And it's all the same money getting spent, some of it saved, but then most of it re-spent. So take a look in your book on page 281 to see an example of how that works. And then as a practice, in class we wrote our own example. So the difference between deficit and debt is pretty important to at least have an idea of what the two terms mean. And they're going to be really important for you in your future lives, because the debt, the national debt, is going to be our responsibility. As we age, we are the ones paying back the money that our government has borrowed to spend. So a deficit is the difference between revenue or income and spending. So how much does the government take in taxes, and how much does it spend on programs? In 2014, our gross domestic product for the U.S. was about $17.4 trillion, a lot of money. But our income, the government income at the federal level, was about $3 trillion. So of that, all the money in our economy, $17.4 trillion, the government taxed about $3 trillion of it. But the government spent on its programs $3.5 trillion. So if you'll notice, there's a difference of about 0.5 trillion or 500 billion. It's actually about $483 billion that we spent that we didn't earn in income, so we had to borrow it. And that is the deficit. It's the difference between how much we took in, the government took in, and how much the government spent that they had to borrow. And here we can see a chart of the deficit over time. We've been in deficit for a long time. Only in the late 1990s, in the year 2000, did we have actually the government having a surplus where the government took in more money than it spent. And lately, in 2000, after 2001, because of the wars we were fighting, and then after 2008, because of the recession, where the government decided to use Keynesian economics to try to stimulate the economy, the government borrowed money and spent a lot of money to try to get aggregate demand to go up again and to get the economy running again. And you can see that lately our deficits have been getting smaller and smaller because the government is no longer trying to make up for what people aren't spending. People are spending more and more money now because the economy is getting better. Debt is different from the deficit. Debt is how much total we have borrowed. So a deficit is how much we had to borrow in a given year. Debt is all of the amount of money that we had to borrow added together. So in 2005 we had to borrow money and that got added onto our debt, and in 2006 we had to borrow money, the government did, and that got added onto our debt. So again, our current GDP is about 17.8 trillion. I think I said 17.4 earlier. It depends on how it can be estimated. But our current debt is over $18 trillion. So we have borrowed more money as a country than we make in a year. And it's just like someone who buys a house. They usually take out a mortgage, and the mortgage is often more than they make in a year. If you buy a $150,000 house and you only make $50,000 a year, you're borrowing. You have more debt than you make in a year. Now you can still pay that off because you pay it off slowly, but it's still kind of, if you lose your job, you're in trouble, right? So this is a chart that shows the red bars show the growth of our national debt over time. And the numbers are very small, but we can see that up till about 1972 was pretty low, and then after that it grew pretty quickly. We started borrowing more and more. The blue line is how much of a percent of our GDP that debt is. So if our GDP was only 1 trillion and we borrowed 1 trillion, that would be 100% of our GDP. So this is a 100% level right here. So back in World War, it looks like this probably World War I, World War II. Numbers are too small, but during one of the wars, we probably had to borrow quite a bit of money, and relative to our GDP. But then it kind of went down, and so we only had a debt that was about less than half the size of our total economy. Now we're getting to the point where our debt is about the same size as our total GDP. We are borrowing as much as our entire country makes in a year, or we have borrowed that much. So what are the risks and rewards of this kind of deficit and debt so that we can do this government spending? Well, one benefit is that it helps increase aggregate demand. If government is borrowing and spending money, then it increases aggregate demand, which you'll recall the formula is CIGNX, household consumption, business investment, government spending, and net exports. And that government spending is helping to increase the total aggregate demand. But there are some costs because we need to pay back this debt eventually. And the interest payments on this debt that we borrowed are high. We're paying billions of dollars every year just on interest to the people that we borrowed money from. So we're not spending that money on helping the economy. We're just lining people's pockets who have lent us this money. And if interest rates go up, if we need to pay people more money to keep borrowing, we're going to pay more and more money in interest, which could be a drag on the economy because the government basically would take people's money in taxes, and then instead of spending it to help the economy, they would have to pay people that we borrowed money from. And that would be really harmful to the economy because it would decrease aggregate demand, right? You're taking money away from people who would otherwise spend it, and then you're giving it to other people, maybe other parts of the world who don't help our economy. So there are some risks to having all this debt also. So in class we played a fiscal policy quiz game, and I hope we'll be playing more games like that, and I hope this little review was helpful for you as you think about how fiscal policy works and how debt and deficits work.